Excellent. Let's start class number 9. Today is Thursday, February 3rd, 2022. So we're pacing really well. We're like a few classes ahead of where I thought we'd be by now. I feel like a comedian. I'm like, what am I going to do? I need more material pretty soon. But that was always the plan, because then we're going to actually start to discuss your projects a bit more. Like the idea would be that we go through all of this, and then once we cover finance, accounting, strategy, culture, sales, corporate development, financing, mergers and acquisitions, legal, then you guys are in theory kind of like trained to be gladiators, and you could go out there and apply it to your project, your product, your service. And ideally, at that point, if you guys are comfortable, you could open up and discuss. So, welcome to this 9th class of managing the small enterprise from concept to reality. Before we get into sales, which is today's theme, I want to talk about a few things in real life that kind of touch on different topics that we've kind of discussed. So yesterday, Facebook, the company formerly known as Facebook, Meta, announced its earnings, and its stock price fell by like 20-25%, which for a company worth close to $1 trillion, it was actually $800 billion. That's a massive fall. So, this is a company that, to their credit, has expanded through acquisition. Facebook, the app itself, has plateaued. I mean, it's got a couple of billion users, which is really enormous. But in the key markets like US and Canada, there's not that much more room to grow. And even though it's really valuable to have all these users all over the world, those areas are not monetizing as much because ad rates are lower, discretionary income is lower. So, a few years ago, they bought Instagram, which I would put as a top 5, if not top 2 or top 3 acquisition in media. I think Google's acquisition of YouTube is arguably the greatest media merger and acquisition of all time. Google's acquisition of Android, which is technology more than media, but still, like in terms of media, gateway accessing media, I think that is probably number 2. But you could argue Facebook buying Instagram for $1 billion is number 2 as well, or top 3. Instagram had 11 or 12 employees, and Facebook bought it for $1 billion, which is a ton of money. It was an insane ratio of like value per employee. Even if you're not driven by money, yeah, if you get that, you probably would accept it as well. But Instagram is easily worth $100 billion today, if not more. So that's a great acquisition. And they bought WhatsApp. They bought WhatsApp for like $20 billion, which is widely used. But so Mark Zuckerberg has now kind of, some of it is maybe FOMO, fear of missing out. Some of it is maybe fear of his business shrinking. Some of it is envy. We're all driven by these insecurities, these sins and these virtues. So Mark Zuckerberg is now really obsessing over things like Roblox and the metaverse. So I would love to ask you, when you hear about the metaverse, first of all, does everybody know what the metaverse is? Does anybody not know what the metaverse is? So the metaverse would be basically this kind of like virtual reality environment. A few years ago, a decade ago, you had Second Life, where you're kind of replicating the real world, but in this virtual world. And people have avatars that either represent themselves or what they want to be kind of represented by. And I would say COVID has kind of brought a little bit of that with Zoom calls and Google Hangouts, but now amplify it where, imagine us, instead of just having the Zoom calls that we did the first few weeks, imagine if we kind of replicated like this and you put on the Oculus kind of goggles, which look funny, and I see Naruhiko here and I see everybody, and it's not like 2 dimensions on a Zoom call. It's actually like it feels like you're there, right? And that has really interesting applications for communications, for commerce. Imagine if you could go to conferences and almost walk over virtually and talk to people the same way you talk to people at a real conference. Or if you want to go to a different resort and you're thinking of going to Club Med Punta Cana or Club Med Dominican Republic, you could tell what my big priorities in life are. You could maybe kind of walk around, and instead of just pictures and a video, you kind of, oh, wow, look, I could feel almost the water, and I could walk on the sand, and I could see the beach. I mean, that's a good conversion tool when we talk about sales. So there are tremendously interesting benefits to VR and the so-called metaverse. But at the same time, I don't want to be cynical, because I'm sure when people used to talk about the internet or cyberspace, they were like, well, that's boring. Only the geeks and like people with no life would be on it. And today, we're all on the internet, whether we know it or not. So when you guys hear about the metaverse, and there's no wrong answers, but show of hands, who thinks, one, that's lame? I don't want goggles and this virtual BS there, you know? Or who thinks, no, that sounds really interesting for walking around a campus to decide if I'm going to McGill or Harvard, or if I'm going to work for GE or 3M, or if I'm going to Club Med or Disney. Like, who's like, that sounds awesome? Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Who says hashtag lame? Like, I don't want any part of this in the future. Please, it's got to be real. Have we lost our collective marbles? So I see a couple reluctantly, but you seem still on the lame fest. Okay, put up your hands. Don't be just two. Yeah, I mean, it's a weird dystopian. It is a very, very like, you know, again, in the example of like, hey, I'm a student. I can't possibly get on a flight from Barcelona to come to Montreal, but I want to come to Montreal for whatever reason. I'm going to walk around the campus of Concordia, the Loyola campus, or I'm going to walk around McGill. Like, that's not lame. I think that kind of makes sense. If you want to go to like, hey, do I want to stay at this, you know, campus, or like, there's uses to it. But I agree, it's a little bit like, wow, really? Like, so even like a couple of years ago, well, the first year of COVID, we sent everybody like, I was like, people are on Zoom enough. We're not going to all have like a meal together with the staff, but we sent everybody like a nice meal that they could have with their loved ones or their family. And I was like, you don't want to see our face and see each other eat on camera. Just, you know, you're eating with your family, you know, but we're treating you. And so I do think it's a bit, I agree, it's a bit both, right? Okay, so, but do you guys think, so you are analysts, Facebook shares are down 20%. Some of it is TikTok. TikTok is eating away a ton of market share. In a Machiavellian way, Mark Zuckerberg is actually doing cartwheels because he's going to paint the picture of big bad China and big bad TikTok as a threat to American independence. So all of a sudden, all those politicians that were like, Mark Zuckerberg is bad, he's bad for democracy, he's dividing us, all of a sudden they're going to wrap themselves up in the American flag and they want to go take down the big bad communists, right? So it is weird. But this is actually fantastic if you're a Facebook's like chief counsel or in like legal and regulatory affairs, because all of a sudden we're not this big dominating thing. Look, we're being disrupted ourselves. Don't you want to support us the way 50, 70 years ago you supported Boeing and all these other big industrials? So that's one dynamic. But do you think ultimately that his big bet on the metaverse, he's spending $10 billion a year in capital expenditures, CapEx. You're going to have a lot of investors, by the way, saying, what's your CapEx? You don't really have CapEx in most of the businesses you're doing. But do you think this is a boneheaded move, or do you think this is a smart bet? Who says Mark Zuckerberg spending $10 billion a year on the metaverse, whatever that turns out to be, is a smart bet? Show of hands. Wow. Basically, as close to a unanimous majority, like 90% of you said yeah. So who says it's a dumbass move? Okay, that's an interesting choice of words. Desperate. Yeah, so fair enough. The comment was that a lot of the cynicism and frustration is that it's Mark Zuckerberg renaming himself Meta, saying poster child, when you're right, Second Life, Roblox, all these other companies have been doing this. I think the idea is it's less about Facebook owning the metaverse, but more them further accelerating commercialization, adoption, research and development. Exactly. Okay. No, there's multiple. It's like, I think whereas the internet in the late 60s started off with ARPANET, which was a military, like they basically just said, we're going to connect 3 computers in San Fran, Vegas, Area 51, wherever, just to see if these computers can communicate. But then we need like everybody. And then Al Gore, when he invented cyberspace, he basically wrote a law and approved, like pushed sponsored a law that gave a lot of like incentives to companies to develop. And then you had Netscape build the browser. So similarly, I think the idea is Roblox is a commercial enterprise. They have the Roblox environment. And I assure you, during COVID, a lot of young kids would see their friends on Roblox. And it, you know, my daughter was staying in touch with her friends there. And I could see the benefits. I could also see some obvious drawbacks. So Facebook is one of many. You know, the same way that you had 20 years ago, Nokia, Motorola all developed phones. There's its platforms, like there's certain code and language and, you know, things, tools and protocols you use, but they're all going to have their own, you know, kind of framework. And it's like a land grab, right? So the same way that it is shocking to me that like Skype and WebEx all had Zoom, but we say, let's join the Zoom. Like that became the vernacular, right? And again, because if you're too early, it's just as bad as being wrong. And I say this often, you want to be 1 or 2 steps ahead. You don't want to be 10 steps ahead. Because if you're too early, yeah, the party hasn't showed up there. You arrive, you're like, hey, where's the DJ? Where are the people at, right? So you want to be. So Facebook is just, they called shotgun, and it was PR. It was kind of like a head fake. Like, hey, we're not just Facebook, we're all these other things. And we want to own this. To your point, a bit not desperate, but really sins and virtues, envy, fear, greed, fear, paranoia. You had a question. Well, yeah, I mean, Web3, we discussed that. I think if, like, even myself, I'm like, what is this? Like, I just really go, yeah, instead of like logging in with an email address and then connecting to PayPal, to make transactions, and that always creates a bit of friction because then you're like, oh, what's my password? Do I have money? Oh, I'll do it later. It's almost like you become one with your identity and your wallet. And there's just a lot more friction points that you eliminate. Ergo, you create more economic activity. It's basically commercialism on steroids, if you really think about it. You know, but yeah, but it's always like that. There's always these fads. Sorry, there's always these trends that are somewhat faddish, and there's a lot of hype. But then the idea is there are parts of that that grow into a sustainable ecosystem, and some of it not. So I do want to talk about a few other things very quickly. I don't know who here heard of what Whoopi Goldberg said. Why am I bringing this up here? I don't know. It's PR, crisis management. So she made a comment about the Holocaust, which as a layman historian, I think was inaccurate. She basically said, oh, it wasn't about race. It was about man attacking man and whatever. And, you know, I mean, if you read enough history, the Nazis absolutely viewed, you know, Jewish people as a race, and they made their whole policy, which was super wrong, based on race. So Whoopi was wrong. The Anti-Defamation League came out and said she was wrong, and she apologized right away. So that's all I want to discuss. That's really not the point. I personally thought it was a symptom of 2 things. One, just a general lack of education in America. Like, it's great to go and start these wars everywhere. You don't even know where these countries are on a map. So that's one thing. And then the other one is the state of media, where you basically are always kind of trying to grab attention. And it's like, the more you try to, hey, there's a fire here, look at me, eventually you burn down the house, right? So to me, it was a symptom of that. But then ABC suspended her. So who here thinks that ABC and The View did the right thing by suspending her for these comments? And who thinks like, no, maybe it's kind of worse because you are giving ammo to like the right wingers who are like, oh, look, you know, we're being censored when even we're just merely expressing an opinion. Like if you had to advise ABC's boss, who here says, no, she had to be suspended, it was wrong what she said, there needs to be repercussions, and who says, no, it was a boneheaded move, ABC was right to suspend her, show of hands. Okay, ABC was wrong to suspend her. Okay, interesting. Okay, so let's see how people think. Okay, total sudden shift, homework assignments. I think most of you, if not all of you, submitted it. Elias and I are going to chat today about a method to the madness to proceed and review them. We'll keep you posted. Very quickly, a few weeks ago, we were talking about mental well-being, balance, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, we're human beings. We always worry about stuff. So yesterday I was catching up with one of the few investors who actually wanted to invest in Watch Mojo, but we couldn't come to terms, unfortunately. But he's a local, you know, one of the architects of the Montreal venture capital community, John Stokes, over at Real Ventures and Founder Fuel. And in my third book, I go, it's like, imagine if Gordon Ramsay was passionate about founders instead of flounders. That's who John Stokes is. Really smart guy. You know, I always kind of hold him in good regard because he did actually was one of the few that believed in me early, and it kind of sucks that we couldn't come to terms. But you know, we catch up once a month and we kind of talk about life. And you know, I was just saying how things are great, and I always say this to people. I go, there's always something that could bother me, but it's important to kind of realize whatever is bothering you that day, it's just relative to other things. So if that thing, it turns out to be pretty inconsequential, then your life is pretty good. And I go, in the end, it's kind of privilege, perspective, gratitude over expectations that everything is perfect. And he referred a book, The Power of Now, which again will go in my books I've pretended to read cover to cover, but usually read like most of. And if I had to kind of like capture it, oh, here, a diagram, a visual. It's basically, assume on this axis that goes age 0 to 100, and then this is just how much, you know, volume. I was like, when you start off your life, you don't have any memory. There's nothing in your past, obviously. You're building your experiences. So there's not a lot of stuff in your past you regret and get upset about. But as you get older, all of a sudden you're like, oh, maybe I should have asked that girl to dance at the dance. Maybe I should have gone to that other school. Maybe I should have gone to baseball practice, right? And some of it is insignificant, but it's normal that up to a point, you carry this baggage. And then conversely, there's stuff in your future you worry about, but also shouldn't. Again, when you're 6 days old, you have no idea what's going on. When you're 10, you're like, what am I going to do? Which camp am I going to go to? Are my friends going to the same camp or not? Then you're like, am I going to go to the right college? Am I going to get a job? Am I going to get married? Kids, my parents have pressure. Do I take over their business? Do I not? Do I kill them? Are they going to, you know, you kind of start to work. But then eventually, I was like, in between is the stuff that matters. And when you're young, life is simple. You're just enjoying things. But then the stuff that matters takes up less and less of your attention, right? You start to get bogged down with regrets and worry. But eventually you do get to a point where you're like, screw it. Why am I worried about stuff in the future that I shouldn't be worried about? And why am I regretting things in the past that I can't change? And that explains who I am, for better or worse. And I realized, again, I was drawing this morning, we were chatting about worrying about nothing, relatively speaking. And I go, yeah, the sooner in life you hit that inflection point, the happier you are, whether it's happiness, awareness, fulfillment, serenity now, whatever. So I would say balance is a journey to a destination you never get to. I myself am trying to get to this, but I would say this is a good representation of how you should not worry about the past and the future. Okay, let's now talk about sales. Super exciting. Okay, so we've looked at a lot of these pillars: finance and accounting, purpose, people, culture, marketing, technology, product, service. As I mentioned, we're ahead of schedule. I feel like Jerry Seinfeld, that needs like a new set of material. Otherwise, we're going to run out. But in a few classes, we're going to shift, and you guys are going to start to talk a little bit about your problems. Could be this stuff. But it should be like, hey, our project, we thought this was the market share, but this is something else. We're trying to get on the App Store and we can't. So we're going to I'm going to help you guys, solve some problems that are normal in this racket. And today we're going to talk about sales, the paradox of sales, the paradox of pricing, and many other fun things. So obviously, everything I do has to almost become a list. So I thought of like a number of lessons or themes that you should be applying to your business and your business model. The first lesson is you're rarely actually selling the actual product or service, right? Again, I spend way too much time on Twitter. Rolex sells status, not watches. Supreme sells scarcity, not clothing. Harley Davidson sells a lifestyle, not electronics. Great marketing teams sell feelings, not products, right? Not rocket science, but you should look at it like that, right? Whatever it is that you think you're selling is actually what I call the secondary demand. Your primary demand is really something a bit more intangible, and frankly, it could feed very much into insecurities that your target audience has. Oh, wait. Oh, more than a few. Number two, you're all in sales. We are all in sales. Who here actually, show of hands, thinks of themselves as like a salesperson or a good salesperson? I see one hand. I see a second hand, a third hand, 4. You are all in sales. You may not know it. You may not want it. But I'll never forget when I was working in customer service at Royal Bank, people used to call, I'm going to sue you. I'm going to call CBC to complain. I was at the gas station. My card got turned down. You guys suck. Most of the time, they forgot that they bought a bunch of stuff the night before, or they ran a big tab at the bar the night before. They don't have it, any balance available. Once in a while, it was, the bank would mess up. In fact, when I started working there, they upgraded their system from a legacy system to Total Systems, which was this new awesome software, but that had a lot of kinks in it. Long story short, every other call was like a death threat. I loved that. I sometimes misspeak to my team. I go, I love it when you guys have problems. And that's not really what I mean to say. I mean to say, I love it when you come to me with your problems because I could fix it, which is what I've always liked. But so one time a client was like, I must say, you are great at sales. He goes, I called here to cancel my account. I'm getting off this call, super happy, having basically upgraded my card, going from like a non-annual fee paying to something that maybe paid annual fee for the bank, so revenue for the bank. But because he was a big spender, he would now get points. It was like magic. Everybody's happy. But I was offended. I was like, great at sales. I'm a finance grad. Like, I'm going to be the CEO of this bank in a few years. You guys know me, and obviously my stupid other expressions to GE and RBC. And again, we're all worried. I was worried about the future. What do you mean sales? I'm a finance guy. I'm going to be the CEO. Please don't insult me. No, but I was like, oh, thank you. My tar off. I was like, oh, thank you, sir. Very nice of you. I was like foaming, I'm pissed there. But it stuck with me. Like 25 years later, I reference that all the time. It was the best advice or thing I could hear because I was like, well, no, it's true. I'm not selling credit cards. Here I'm selling goodwill. I'm saving this bank's reputation, and they will reward me with a promotion to wealth management or Dominion Securities. Foreshadowing, they did not, says the narrative. But you understand, like I was basically in the business of being this ambassador, this kind of statesman that was basically representing the bank to all these people that wanted to trash the bank and say the RBC sucks. And sometimes they suck for certain reasons, but overall, RBC was a good bank, right? But later on in my career, when I joined Mama, it was a support role. And trust me, we're going to talk a little bit about figuring out sales model that works and doesn't. But I ended up really, the breakthrough moment in my career was when I did sales for Ask Men, which was a job I would have never even considered taking. Would have been beneath me. I was like, are you kidding? But it was that line that kind of woke me up. And I just want this to resonate with you guys, that you're all in sales. But sales is like an abstract, it's like a widget. It's a feeling. You're basically in the business of winning people over, earning their trust. It could be an investor, it could be an interviewer. I didn't win the trust of those two young ladies when I said, in 20 years, you could brag about having hired the next CEO of GE. Didn't land that well. Anyway, everyone is a salesperson. Remember these guys? This is a slide from a previous lecture when I talked about those who are born on third base. I said it's really easy to be envious or jealous or angry at people who maybe are more fortunate than you and were born in a right family with the right name. But even people with the best last names have a ton of pressure. Sure, some of them could care less. They just want to spend their trust fund money. But a lot of them have their own anxieties and they want to prove themselves. And they frankly have to still sell something to mom or dad or grandma or an uncle because they also have to convince people, right? So everybody, even those that seem like, oh, this person has never had to work hard. Not true. Everybody is in the business of convincing others, regardless of whether their last name is Bronfman, Molson, or Pelado. Everyone has a ton of selling to do in different ways to different stakeholders. Stephen Bronfman, son of Charles, recently was on his journey. I think, I say this respectfully, as a baseball fan, would have loved for the Expos to come back. It made no sense. Once the Expos left Montreal, I used to host a show on Team 990. That's how long ago it was. Now it's Team 690. It was like a baseball show. I had another show on lifestyle and business and sports. I had season tickets to the Expos. But once the Expos left, it was basically like they changed every diamond to a soccer pitch. And what is the result of that? Canada is crushing it in its pool. We beat the US 2-0. That is the dividend of this whole generation that grew up starting to play a bit more soccer. There was no real interest for baseball at scale in Montreal. But him, because of legacy, obviously passionate about baseball, was on this journey trying to convince the government, media, everybody, we need a baseball stadium to then have a baseball team. And it doesn't matter what your last name is. You still have to sell. You still have to convince people. Jeff Molson, brilliant business guy, passionate hockey fan. Yes, obviously, if his last name was not Molson, he would not have the means to go out there and raise money, convince people maybe. But you still have to do all that to get $600 million to go buy a NHL franchise, which is now worth over $1 billion. He's got to convince players to come. I've been very vocal. Like, it was nice to meet him, but I'm not starstruck. I said this on Twitter and at him. I said, the problem with Jeff Molson, when people were saying July 1st, why don't the Canadians get free agents? I said, the problem is very, very simple. Other owners, other general managers meet hockey players, and they're probably a bit more like, it would be an honor for you to come and play for our team. These are the wonderful ways we're selling you on our city and our community. When Jeff Molson meets people, his business card says, winner of 24 Stanley Cups. None of those came on his watch. So there is this element, unfortunately, where it's your privilege, Mr. Hockey Superstar, to come play for the Montreal Canadiens, which are kind of a big deal, the only game in town in Montreal, but not to that hockey player who could go anywhere, pay less taxes, not have this weather. But he's in the business of sales. He's selling. He doesn't have to sell hockey to the faithful here. It's hockey. It's like cocaine and religion all mixed in one. This is like, it's the easiest job there, but super hard time bringing talent here for all the reasons we said. Pierre Pelado, his father, amazing entrepreneur, flawed individual, but you know, I've studied a lot of entrepreneurs. Pelado Sr., one of the most badass entrepreneurs I've ever studied. Pierre Pelado, whom I know a number of executives who work for him directly, they all say the same thing. Really tough guy to work for, but never met somebody that does not need to work hard who works that hard. You got to have respect for that. So again, he was trying to sell and is trying to sell the NHL and the other owners on a hockey team for Quebec, right? You're always selling no matter how easy you think other people have. But you got to be smart about this. I think some of you, hint, the products and the projects and the services you're trying to build not so sure yet. Because you got to go where the clients are. Go fish where the fish are, right? Like a lot of you are building these apps. Apps are a nightmare. But go for it. This is the metaverse, you know? It's like, doesn't matter. You're not really going to lose your savings. But apps are super hard. Like the mobile web beat out apps. Yes, in aggregate, apps are a juggernaut for Apple. But the number of dead casualties and roadkill in the app ecosystem is insane. And a lot of you are like, we're building an app. Okay, let's see how that goes. Good luck with Apple's customer service. You know what I mean? But again, it's fine. I think you guys have to learn. The next thing is you're going to have to differentiate between making a quick buck versus a recurring trade that basically will allow you to build a real business. This is what I call the paradox of scale. Every investor you meet gets turned on, is driven by, is focused on, can this company scale? It's not in their defense that they care about scale for scale's sake. It's that smartly, they don't want to keep having to write a check as you add clients, as you grow your revenues. They want to give you a limited amount of money and make sure that as you grow, the product almost sells itself. If your business, your product or service does not scale, you probably should not waste much time talking to venture capitalists. So I've discussed this and I talk about the paradox of scale, which is things that scale quickly aren't necessarily sustainable, and things that are sustainable generally historically don't scale quickly. WatchMojo did not scale. And I did not want it to scale because that would have meant a very crappy product. I knew that, like with cost, low enough was good enough. I used to tell people years ago, yeah, I'm not interested in this kind of like gig economy model. I think you should have full-time employees. It gives them a bit of peace of mind. You can amortize costs a bit better. Your employees show up versus, oh, I'm a wannabe actor. Maybe I'm going to come Tuesday to do this video, but oh, look, I got another audition. So you're at an event and you don't have a host. There's no camera guy, right? It's like you get what you pay for or what you don't pay for. But even in terms of the model, yeah, I wasn't interested in producing 10,000 videos for $2. I was like, I think we should produce 1,000 videos a year for, let's say, $200, whatever that number is. VCs were like, this man is crazy. Like, what is he talking about? And I had to stick to my gut. It meant 6 years of losses, but we built a better business. Now today, they're like super envious. They're like, very impressive business. I always believed in you, but I'm like, no, you didn't. You said that's not really a business, you know, pal. Anyway, so the point is, you guys will be really tempted to chase near-term profits and do these kind of deals or business models that are not sustainable. And worse, they may not even be scalable. So you really, really have to think through, take your time, figure that out. And so, yeah, so basically that's like patience and persistence is key, but it's a bit of a paradox because you also are running out of money. So your runway shrinks, but you got to nail that. Like these are the paradoxes I refer to. Remember what I said about the paradox of compensation? Your senior executives want you to pay them for their past. Your young possible studs want you to pay them for their maybe potential in their future. It's hard. You want to accommodate everybody, you go bankrupt. Same thing here. You want a business model that is sustainable and scalable to some extent, but you don't want to rush into finding that, but you might run out of money. Similarly, but different, there's always an animal farm rule. You know, all these animals are created equal, but some are more equal than others. Not all sales are equal. What does that mean? There is a little secret to generating value, which is, remember, any given Sunday, it's a game of inches. I would paraphrase it to say it's a game of multiples. What you're seeing now with the NASDAQ is the company's profitability has not changed, but a lot of share prices are being slashed. Why? Because the multiples, price to sales, price to earnings, is going down. In certain economic conditions, like loose money, loose fiscal policy, we're going to just print money and give people free money, and we're not going to let them work. So they're going to basically take the money the government gives them, and they're going to open up accounts on Robinhood, and they're going to start to trade. And America's a gambling nation. Guess what happens? Everybody gets into stock trading, right? I earned 75% in 2020 without even trying. Last year, surprise, surprise, I did not earn 75%, and I knew I wouldn't earn 75%. It was impossible. But so it's all about multiples. So for us, it wasn't about just finding revenue that comes in. The worst thing for us to have done would have been to go and become a production company, where actually that's the second worst thing. The worst thing we could have done was starting to do corporate videos, weddings, and bar mitzvahs. Fun events, but not things you probably want to record. Why? There's somebody with a camera who will charge $1 less. And production companies, which there are many, like when you watch Pawn Shop, when you watch Wife Swap, when you watch American Idol, yes, it airs on Fox or ABC, but there's a production company that was hired to shoot that. And the model is simple. They go, it's $1 million an episode. We're going to charge 10% as our fee. So they make $100,000 per episode. It's a great lifestyle business, a lot of hard work. But that revenue, first of all, you're not really valued on $1 million. As a production, you're going to be valued on that $100,000 that you get. But on top of that, you might get 1 or 2 times that number. Watch Mojo, the Field of Dreams approach, we would deficit finance content, which was crazy, sure. We would put it out there, build up real distribution, meaning it wasn't like, let's trick people into watching our videos. People would basically want to watch these videos. They would be engaged and attentive. On average, on YouTube, people spend 6 minutes per session to watch our videos. It's unheard of. But our catalog being evergreen, we made money on that catalog going forward. So we could sometimes command 10 times revenue, right? Even at their peak in 2015-16, our bigger competitors, the bellwethers of digital media, Vice Media, BuzzFeed, Vox, they would get 5 to 7 times revenue. They were valued on revenues because they didn't have any profits. We were profitable, so we would get 10, 15 times profits, right? You have to understand how multiples work. It doesn't mean you need to understand finance. Like, you don't need a finance degree, but you have to understand that investors and acquirers are going to place a different value on different types of revenue. It's literally just, how much does an investor bid on an income stream? The higher, the better for you. And not all revenue is the same way. Software companies that have recurring models where a client comes and says, I'm going to pay DocuSign $10 a month, every month, to be able to sign contracts digitally, that recurring model is really attractive to the VCs, right? So what you are building and the business model for what you are building is really, really critical, because you don't want to be the company that has a ton of revenue, not profitable, meaning not the right margins, but also not commanding the right multiples, regardless of whether it's price to revenue or price to earnings. This is like 90% of what explains WatchMojo's value over the years, okay? I would like to tell you what those numbers are, but I also don't want to brag and come across like an a-hole. But that is literally why people are like, wow, off that P&L, profit and loss statement, you guys are valued as such. That is arguably why education matters. Reading those Business Week fortunes and getting a finance degree paid off in that sense. It's good to pay a little bit of attention during class. Another lesson, my boss had asked, man, nice guy, didn't trust his shadow, ended up suing me. It was frivolous, meritless. I'm sure he loves it that I mentioned that, but we made a good team. You know, nobody's perfect. There were a lot of good things about him. We made a good team, and that he was actually really good at keeping costs down. He would joke, not me, that his last name in Portuguese meant cheap, which was unfair. He wasn't cheap. He was just, you know, we all grow up. We are all careful of spending. And I was really good at generating revenue. I should not admit this. I never look at the tab when I go to restaurants. There could be 3 bottles instead of 2, 6 plates instead of 4. I just sign it, leave a tip, thank you, off I go. Kind of dumb, but that's always been my nature. I'm like, I could care less about the loss expense portion of the P&L. But I'm like always thinking, how do you grow? How do you expand? You know, when I played soccer, yes, you saw that video. I actually stole the ball. There was a defensive move there, but I was like already thinking of going straight for the net and scoring. I have a one-track mind when it comes. I'm pure offense. I love it. I could play defense, but there's other people that can play defense, right? So I'm always go, 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 looking to close, looking to score like a madman. But I recognize that for the company to succeed, I need people. My wife, my spouse, one of my business partners, she's the yin to my yang. I go, I'm an accelerator, she's kind of a brake. And my team, this is both endearing and super frustrating. 2 years ago, they're like, we need to have a meeting. I'm like, sure. You know, I show up there like a cub. What are we going to discuss? They're like, we're going to have this new process. I'm like, okay. You know, as I said, management is writing rules, systems. Leadership is knowing when to break them. But you need management, you need systems. They're like, we have this new process called the handbrake. I'm like, uh-oh, I don't like the sounds of this. They're like, you know how you have all these ideas? I'm like, uh-oh, I really don't like where this is going. They're like, well, once in a while, we're kind of throwing a flag on the play and applying the handbrake. Now, a lot of CEOs, the Benito Mussolini, Kim Jong-il school of leadership would be like, screw you, I'm a rock star, I could do whatever I want. Yeah, that's not me. I was like, okay, kind of frustrating. I want to do all these projects, but they're right. I'm just creating a lot of noise. And these guys are busy and they're kind of like trying to stay focused. And I'm showing up with 15 ideas per day. And you're going to have those people on your team as well. You got to channel those people. They're really valuable. Maybe you are one of those people. Maybe you guys are like, that's just pretty boring. I got crazier ideas. Great. You need to surround yourself because $1 in revenue is hard, but $1 out is really easy. We reinvested millions of dollars from 2016 to 2018. Most of it did not pay off. I had industry friends that were like, you know, the Ash is a visionary, Ash is an idiot, Ash is a genius, Ash is stupid. I would totally love to go back and be in Ash's shoes, that sucker. Like it changes and you got to kind of balance out the noise. But I had a lot of people that I think they still respect me, but they're like, wait, let me get this straight. You reinvested all this money and you don't really have much to show for it. But a year or two after that, they were like, man, how did you get revenue to rocket ship again? And I was like, remember when we sat at that restaurant in Soho and like you trashed me? I'm like, they're like, oh yeah. I was like, well, not to say I told you so. That's the passive aggressive Ash, by the way. But I'm like, we had to do that. And if we would not have, we'd be like, we would have shrunk. One person always encouraged me, Christopher Gaffney, private equity investor out in Boston. He was like, Ash, most entrepreneurs don't get that. You have to reinvest, otherwise you shrink. I was like, okay. So always remember that. But it is true that your cost model is everything. James Carville was an advisor to Bill Clinton. He had this line, it's the economy, stupid. I'm always careful when I say that because I don't want people to think I'm calling them stupid. It's a reference to that, meaning investors, not investors. Voters just care about the economy. In some ways, it's the cost model stupid. If your cost model does not make sense, to paraphrase Yogi Berra, you can't lose money and make it up on volume, right? Today, we are seeing the same bizarro, remember the second class? I said the early .com winners explain who the winners are today. There were companies that used to basically do delivery and lose a ton of money. They never right-sized their business. So today, the DoorDashes, the Uber Eats, Instacarts, there's some really valuable businesses and some are going to survive because whoever owns that is going to be really, really popular. But 99% of those are going to die because it's the cost model, stupid. So if you have a model that's like, we're not really making money, again, you're trying to land a huge plane on the tiniest of airstrips, so much could go wrong. Another paradox, lesson number 6, free is actually very expensive. When you give away something for free, I don't want to say never. They say never is never. I'm saying it, you will never be able to charge for it. Really, really hard. And you need a ton of engagement in users. So way, way back, like Hotmail sold to Microsoft for $400 million. They didn't have much revenue, but this was early on, it was a land grab. So a lot of companies have pioneered this freemium model. As the name implies, it's a combination of free and premium, meaning, okay, you get this kind of like basic bare bones model for free. But if you actually want like meat on the bone or mashed potatoes or gravy, well, you got to pay for that. But you can look at this NFT of food if you'd like for free, but you actually eat. So that is probably something you're going to have to do. But what is the problem? Conversion, churn, customer service complaints. So when you're going to apps and all that, this is your nightmare and your salvation. I've repeated this many, many times. What's the story? We've seen this guy, Steve Jobs, the most powerful person in the world is a storyteller. The storyteller sets the vision, values, and agenda of an entire generation that is to come. What is your story of your company, of your product, of your service? Why is the client taking the meeting? Why is a user clicking on the link to go and see what your payment plans are? Remember this guy, Dave Ambrose. He's a general partner at Bungalow Capital, where I am a LP, a limited partner. Remember, some of you asked the importance of the business plan and all that. And I said, what do you look for? A deck, a business plan, a song, a dance, a death threat? He goes, that's a great question. Ultimately, the single highest leverage and action an entrepreneur can do is become a great storyteller. And in the context of sales, you can attract the best customers and so on. Work on story. This is why I'm forcing you guys to write a press release. It's kind of vain. I used to write press releases talking about Watch Mojo and Ash in the third person, quoting myself. Kind of crazy. They're kind of sociopath-like. I mean, I'm not a sociopath. I'm actually very empathetic. But you have to start thinking like that. You have to be able to tell your story. Early on, nobody cares about you. They don't care about your story. They don't care about your product. So if you don't tell it, why would anybody else do that? Get in the habit of doing that. Can you replicate it? Right? I mean, I'm an open book. We've alluded to this. I knew what the model would be, and I was praying it would work out. Over time, this was a question on Quora in 2010. It worked out. Like, false modesty aside, we nailed the model when we didn't really even have that much money coming in. But the key was that what worked was something that I knew would become very much repeatable. We take our content, we find distribution platforms, and we built in these recurring revenue streams. People sometimes want to come and discount us and say, well, you guys are ad supported. But even those people, it's like those people that go, well, without Ash, what's the bus insurance? Without Ash, maybe there's no business. I'm like, really? No, let's have that talk in a few weeks. They meet my team, they see the process, and then it's a very awkward follow-up that they're like, Ash, what is it that you do here? And it's like Kaiser Soze. I'm like, I don't exist. I don't need to be here. You get that? I'm like, that's what a smart entrepreneur does. Some of it is luck. You have a great team. You empower them, you delegate, you get out of their way, you support them when you need. But my point is, it's the same thing with the revenue stream. You want to be able to set it up so that there's a recurring factor. First mover advantage. So there's a great line that we used to say when I was at Mama. It's like crazy. You should come on the road with me. It's like exactly what I'm going to talk about this. It's not the first to market. It's the first to scale. It's like 2000. We all used to say this. We all thought we were so smart. It's kind of true though. Google was not the first search engine, but it's the first that had a business model that scaled. So first to market is key if you want to be the first to fall on your face. If you want to be the first to make mistakes. Hey, I'm driving on this road. everything is great. Oh, look, I'm in a ditch. Can you get out of the ditch? So being first in business, you want to be a couple of steps ahead of the trends. You don't want to be 6 steps ahead. But it's really more about just figuring out a model that scales, that's sustainable, not committing too much. Like, oh, we wrote this code on this technology. It does not scale. It keeps crashing. So being first is a nice to have, but historically, the first has never won anything. It's more figuring out a model that works first and being able to adapt. But my only thing is it's never in a vacuum. You could give a lot of your product away, but then you have to make sure you don't run out of money somehow so that somebody does come and buy you and they feel like they could maybe make it profitable. So it's never like, I remember when I used to take productions and operations management in business school. It's like a boring class, but there was one thing that as a framework that always stuck with me, which was you have an objective, but there's a constraint. Balance. It's never just the objective. It's like, well, what's the constraint you're navigating around? So you could give stuff away and just say, we're going for market share and we're going just for pure, as many users as we can because we want to sell it. Great. But I hope you understand that sellers are always around and they have FOMO, but when there's markets are jittery, they disappear. It's like they'll give you an umbrella when it's sunny. And then when they see a cloud before the rain, they're like, I have my umbrella. So you could go and give away all you want because you're going to get people, but you also need to then say, okay, am I converting? So if not, then it's just an exit. Like, I want to sell this, so I got to make it attractive. Like, it's fine. Any strategy and tactic could work, but it depends. It depends on, how do you account for the glaring weakness of that strategy? But so I 3 times in my life had to figure out a business model. At the search engine, I didn't build it, but I kind of was studying. And frankly, it was the go-to overture model that Google inspired themselves from. Then when I worked in online publishing, again, it wasn't reinventing the wheel, but it was clearly taking elements from previous media models. And again, at WatchMojo, I kind of just went back to history and said, well, how do other companies make video? And the answer was pretty obvious, and it's always keep it simple, stupid. So Overture, originally GoTo, had this pay-per-click model. It was brilliant. You search for Madrid, advertisers pay to list their ads. It used to be blasphemy to think, oh my God, search results and people are paying, but it was like, well, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're only going to pay if your search result is relevant and of quality. You're not going to have a hotel in Bratislava run an ad if somebody is searching for Madrid. The odds that you're like, all of a sudden, I'm not going to Madrid, I'm going to Slovakia, where I assume and hope Bratislava is, but I could be wrong. It's like, so ideally you get really great hotels in Madrid who are bidding up the keyword for hotels in Madrid. And so this was a great model. They only had these paid listings. Google had actual search results, but Google took this model and said, hey, these links to the side of our search results, which is how they make all that money. Remember this guy, tiny little ads. It became the greatest ad model ever. Ask Men, what I did wasn't rocket science. I was like, okay, we could sell banner ads, but we started doing what today is like revolutionary branded content. Sponsored content existed, but we were ethical about it. So it was like, hey, it's 4th of July weekend. Here's some basic ways to make sure you cook your meat right and you chill your beer properly. And if you're interested, here are some barbecues you could buy from Weber and some coolers from Coleman. And oh yeah, we'll make 10% profit if you click on it. It worked. It was scalable. It was sustainable. And everybody was happy. Client was happy. Viewer was happy. My boss was happy. WatchMojo, same thing. We produce content. Let's go where the fish are, YouTube, and let's sign deals where we'll make money every time people watch our videos. Let's not trick people. No bullshit that is not sustainable. A lot of our peers used to basically try to game the audience. They would say they had 1 million video views, but they had 0 video views. It was all fake. And to quote Warren Buffett, you never know who's swimming naked till the tide goes down. Once the tide went down, they were all like, oh, we don't actually have any views. Whereas for us, it took a long time to generate revenues, but the views were real. The people were real. There were actually crazy people, the Mojoholics, that watched our videos. What's the benefit? Are you doing branding? Are you doing leads? Are you driving revenue for other people? This is, I mean, I could go on, there's a whole class. You have to really, really articulate what it is that a user and a client is getting from becoming your client. And these are all very different strategies, right? Like you're not always selling, in branding, you're not always selling a banner ad next to an arena. Like when Watch Mojo sponsored the New York Islanders at Barclays Arena in Brooklyn, we actually did that for a couple of years. Why do you think we would do that as a YouTube channel predominantly? Why would we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on that? What was the insecurity we were trying to address? That we're not just a YouTube channel. We're this big media company. Now, yes, we also wanted to take our clients and entertain them. So we went and we entertained Universal McCann, the ad agency, and oh, surprise, 3 months later, they sent us a $500,000 campaign for the US Army. So it was a branding play. It helped us with leads, and it absolutely drove to revenue, right? But ultimately, if you're the New York Islanders, you're appealing a little bit to all of those things. Hey, you know what? Like, you guys, you're going to be next to JP Morgan. Chase is an advertiser. Budweiser, come. Do you want to meet this former Islanders player? I'm like, not really. But, you know, but they're selling this vibe. They're appealing, and you yourself, you're kind of like convincing yourself, right? So just different tactics for all that. And then ultimately, you always have to be on. Remember this movie, Glenn Ross, a couple decades ago, more than a couple decades ago. It was based on a play. And there's a pretty funny scene there with like this gentleman, Alec Baldwin. He has bigger problems right now. Yeah, he right now he's on a weird place in life right now with everything's going on in his life. But basically, you're always closing, you're always trying to sell. And yeah, and this is an article you could read if you're interested in how online advertising and sales has changed. Okay, so 35, we have 20 minutes left for any questions. Uber is like a crazy story because, my Lord. So first of all, Travis Kalanick, whatever, like, yeah, both visionary and a-hole. Like if you just go with the culture or lack thereof that he created, toxic, like just like, so I'm not defending anybody, you know, but my God, like if you think like us saying we're going to create fair use-based programming and tell rights holders we could do this and then build a commercial business, and that's like brash and confident. Like I remember looking at them and going, these guys are just going in a market and they're just basically like disrupting the taxi market without a care for the local laws. And when like the cops shut down the Uber fleet, or like in places like Turkey, they start beating up the Uber drivers. They're just like, we'll take care of it. We'll pay these people. It's like, I remember one time I was standing in like the Telus building here, and I would just see like people would get in the Uber. It was like a trap. The cops would show up, and I was like, this is like, is there a drug deal going on? Like I remember like thinking of the anxiety. So my point is, Uber was the poster child of break shit fast, you know, don't ask for permission. Hell, don't even ask for forgiveness. Just, we don't care. It takes a particularly, what's the word? It's not crazy. It's not insane. It takes like a demented person to do that. You know, like it's insane. But if you think about it, I totally understand why that product came to be, because I remember one time I came out of a VC pitch that had gone as bad as you could imagine, like in venture capital land already, they don't like content. San Francisco, where everything has to be tech, it's like a waste of time. But anyway, I come out and I'm waiting for a cab, There's no cabs in San Francisco. There's never cabs in San Francisco. And in New York, like at 5, when the shifts change, yeah, there's no cab. You can't get it. Like a lot of the drivers are Muslim. They want to go pray. Too bad. Nobody's going to drive you to LaGuardia. So I understood the frustration that this is a very bad way of operating. And because of this amazing invention with GPS and payments and all that. So it was like brilliant, psychotic, but still not money making. But it's like a company worth $60 billion. Now, what is really, really impressive of Uber is I remember there was like a 2-week span in 2018 where I went Montreal, Lisbon, back to Montreal, and 2 days later, Montreal, Paris, because I wanted to come back and see my kids. I mean, I was like 2 weeks in Europe, it's cool, but I was like, what am I going to do? Eat a baguette by myself, like nonstop. Then I did Montreal, Paris for a few days, and then I did Paris, St. Petersburg. And there was also Mexico at some point in that month. But it was like a blur, obviously, because I was on a plane the whole time. But I was like, the one constant is Uber. Uber was everywhere. I could come out of any airport, press a button. You know, I remember going to BC, Vancouver, and there was no Ubers at the time. But generally, I was just so impressed with what they had built. But I'm just saying, that takes the most insanely driven, rigid, arrogant, and I'm not knocking, I'm just saying if you're comfortable, but like it was just an insane model, but it worked. I don't even know how it worked, but it worked. So it's like it goes back to like all of this stuff. You know, like what is your personality? You know, it's like if your personality is Travis Kalanick, that is probably what you should be doing. Because you're combative, you're fighting, you know, but even I, like, for example, when a certain rights holder, I'm like, okay, they really don't welcome the fair use stuff. Yeah, it's like this stuff. You know, your comparative advantage, what do you specialize in? You know, like you have to just be this individual that does not care about governments threatening to shut you down and like the cartel Turkish taxi drivers wanting to kind of break your kneecaps. If you're fine with that, yeah, go take that risk. And, you know, it's like a super impressive network, but still losing money. So kind of could be a house of cards, but most likely I think they, you know, what's that expression? You don't have to outrun the bear. You have to outrun the other guys trying to outrun the bear. That's what they did. I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm just saying the business is secondary to the people. So it takes a very particular person to want to even do that. But if you can pull off something like that, yeah, you're like a rock star entrepreneur, but probably a very bad human being, you know, because it's an insane culture. It's an insane, you know, dynamic because you're constantly flouting the law.